preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening. I'm Laura Kaminsky, Associate Director of Education, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Y for this third evening of our annual series, The Shape of the City. The format tonight will differ slightly from the usual. I guess you figured that out because there's no screen here. There won't be a slide presentation. Instead, moderator Paul Goldberger will conduct a conversation with our very special guest, Philip Johnson, and will then close the evening with a question and answer session with you. In about an hour, the ushers will come down the aisles, collect your cards, and bring them backstage for presentation. As always, it's a pleasure to welcome back our series moderator, Paul Goldberger, architecture critic for the New York Times. Tonight, Paul will be talking with Philip Johnson, who, as you know, is being honored by the 92nd Street Y in recognition of his 80th birthday this year. It's difficult to sum up the contributions of Philip Johnson. His work has left major marks in cities across this country and has made an impact on the evolution of 20th century architecture in general. Just a few of his buildings shall be mentioned. Here in New York, the State Theater at Lincoln Center, the Elmer Holmes Bopst Library at NYU, the Easton Garden wings of the Museum of Modern Art, where, incidentally, Mr. Johnson held the position of Director of the Department of Architecture for many years. Also the AT&T corporate headquarters, and finally, the recent building 53rd at 3rd. From Pennzoil Place in Houston to the Terrace Theater of the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., to the Glass House in Canaan, Connecticut, Mr. Johnson's work has challenged, defined, and altered our vision of 20th century architecture. It is my pleasure to welcome our moderator, Paul Goldberger, and our guest, Philip Johnson. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome, Philip Johnson. One of the stagehands, upon hearing that there were to be no slides, just asked if Philip Johnson would be acting out his buildings. I don't think that is the plan, although if anybody knows how to do a broken pediment, I'm sure he'll be happy to do it. We're just going to be talking this evening about Philip Johnson's architecture, about other people's architecture, about the city, about the future of the profession in general, about all of the subjects that Philip Johnson, throughout one of the most remarkable careers in the history of American architecture, has made his own. Philip, you've, at this point, at your 80th birthday, are in a position that is frequently referred to as being the Dean of American Architecture, a line that I guess has now become a little bit of a cliche, but I think in your case has meaning in that it refers not only to your work, but to your position as a kind of elder statesman of the profession, as somebody who has looked at and watched and encouraged the careers of younger architects as much as you have encouraged your own, who has been a patron of architecture and an advocate of architecture as much as a professional architect on your own, for your own account, so to speak. At this point, at your 80th birthday, being just about as active as you've ever been, what do you hope to accomplish in the next 10 years?
Well, I'm a lot more active, Paul, because, you know, it's a matter of being old, it's all very simple. If you are too young, you can't do anything. And if you're old, you don't have time to do what you're supposed to do. I can recommend old age to all of you. You have to work kind of hard to get there, but once you're there, it's absolutely marvelous. Life begins at 70, and I thought I was going to stop at 80 when I had a heart attack in the spring, but it doesn't stop. And so it still goes on, and I suppose now till I'm 95, I shall have a lot of fun. And I have 5 times the amount of work I had 5 years ago. Simply because I'm old at deanship. Nonsense. not dean of nothing. And it's just I'm the oldest living architect, which is... Isn't that wonderful? So you see the whole world to play with. I have nothing to do now except to talk to the younger and be sure that they're better architects than I am, which incidentally I suspect that they are. That's what interests me, is the next generation. We're going to have simply marvelous architecture. There's a very good book just came out. I can recommend it. Mr. Watkin, what's his first name?
David Watkin.
David Watkin, The History of Western Architecture. And he ends up by saying that the future of architecture is much better than it has been for 50 years or 100 years, he said. So you see, we have a wonderful time coming, and we got wonderful kids. I call them kids. They're now grown up, but that doesn't make any difference to me. You see, you sort of start overlapping generations. I forgot what a young audience this is. This is terrible. They're all in their 20s and 30s. Nobody
Mostly.
should be in their 20s and older. There's somebody. I feel better. You feel kind of lonely when everybody's children around you. I mean, real children. But so it gives me hope whenever I see what somebody like Frank Gehry's doing, that Paul did an eloquent piece on. Do I puff you too? I forget, but I might just as well.
If you want.
Sure. It was a wonderful piece he did on Frank Gehry. He's been a friend of mine for many years, and Frank has finally made it. He's in the New York Times, you see. The rest of us aren't quite as fortunate as Mr. Gehry, but that's...
I think you found your way into the New York Times once or twice in your career.
Some time ago. But you see... No, it's not so much that, but you remember Andy Warhol's pronouncement, which is absolutely accurate. Everyone in the world is famous for 15 minutes. Mr. Gehry is now starting his 15 minutes.
Right. But
I finished mine some time ago.
Philip, you're somewhere if that's really true, you're somewhere around the third hour, I would think, aren't you?
No, I finished my 15 minutes a long time ago, and now I have another niche, the oldest man living, you see, which is a very special citation. But look, these people are not interested in that. We should talk about
well, I hope we'll talk about architecture, but I'm interested in this new personification or self-image of you as sort of, the architectural version of Mel Brooks's 2,000-year-old man.
That's right.
That's
right, and what a happy man he was, sure.
Okay. Given all of that, given the sense you have of yourself as the oldest living architect, okay. A man, however, a great deal younger than Frank Lloyd Wright at the end of his career.
Oh, yes, but then I'm not as old as Frank Lloyd Wright, but he's dead.
That's true. True.
I expect to be older.
He's dead. I mean, they don't quite know that at Taliesin, but I guess it's true. He is dead. It's true. Anyway.
Very good, Paul, very good.
I was going to ask you a different question about time and history and all that, which is historic preservation. As we were coming up here, you began to say that historic preservation was meaning there was no new architecture, that there was going to be no new building because everyone was spending too much time preserving things. That sounds like precisely the kind of taunting comment you love to give.
Well, I don't think I said that.
That is not, in fact, truly to be taken at face value, is it?
I don't think that's true. What I said was, what I'd like to bring out tonight is the enormous dichotomy that's appeared in the past decade in the architecture profession. Now, some of you architects are there? Because I'd like to talk about, not many? Oh, shoot, I thought it was going to be architects tonight. There's one, good.
There's one who admits it. I don't know how many others. If we asked you to put it in writing, and if we had a secret ballot, it might come out differently.
We architects are in a terrible way right now because this dichotomy is getting to us. That is, the one, who's our boss, and what are we working for, and what kind of a city do we expect to get? We get blamed. I get blamed for doing socially irresponsible building, too big. Look, I do what I'm told. Most architects do. That's what we're here for, is to build buildings for people that come in with some money, I admit, to build these things. That's on the one hand. On the other, we have, I like to jokingly to call, though I don't mean it at all, is little old ladies in tennis shoes that are very anxious to see there isn't one hair of one building that's harmed. I'm on both sides. I was a preservationist long before I was an architect, you see. But now I'm an architect, and I do work for the people that in my youth were given all sorts of opprobrious names like speculators and capitalistic fascists, I believe is a mild phrase for them, who are now the patrons of architecture in this country. The speculators have turned into developers, who then have turned into patrons, who then learned architecture and have come to us, right? I mean, Gerald Hines, George Klein, all these people that are well known as patrons of ours. They're patrons in the same sense the Medicis were patrons. They, however, are on one side of the fence, but in this growing dichotomy, the public, you and me, on the other hand, I'll put on my other tie, are on the other. And that is, how can we keep the values of our town? How can we keep the streets that we're used to like they're used to? You see, unfortunately, we aren't wandering around so much in this country. We've settled down and made cities, and we like them. We like them the way they are. We don't want churches to go. Well, we aren't willing to pay for keeping them up, of course, but we insist on their not being taken down. In other words, we as a public are not illogical in any way. I mean, if we stopped all development in New York, would that be good or wouldn't it? I don't know. I'm torn myself. Is Times Square, for instance, where I'm deeply concerned, should it stay just exactly the way it is? Maybe it should. I'm not against sin, you see. I rather like those people that wander the streets, 42nd Street. I've never been to any of those movies, but I'm dying to go, if anybody... I'll take off my glasses sometimes and go incognito.
But you set up a false dichotomy, don't you, between preserving everything or building as we've done it at very large scale?
I mean, it's a spreading of the ways, Paul. There isn't any right or wrong. There isn't any... I don't say that we as preservationists now want to save everything. You're quite right. But we do have a spreading feeling of stopping building. Well, let's take an extreme city, I admit, is San Francisco, that has made a law not to build buildings. Well, why not? What's wrong with San Francisco the way it is? See, I sympathize. I'm trying to build there, so I'm a little bit annoyed that they're being put off for 10 years.
You got 2 or 3 in before that.
Before the rules got in. Right. Oh, no, I'm not building now. We have several pending. They were just plain canceled. So why not? I mean, isn't that the logic of this thing, that the people should decide what buildings they want? Why should people come, especially from out of town? That's a Boston problem. The parachute architects.
Right.
But whether they're parachute architects or not, they do disturb the urban graining, the British call it, the nature of the town. They spoil the neighborhood feeling. We are used to Times Square with a squalid neighborhood as there is, but it's delightful and it's ours. And you come along and gentrify it, which is the dirty word for rehabbing it or making it clean, and we resent that. I think it's absolutely logical, but I don't see the outcome yet. That's what I mean about the dichotomy, Paul. I don't see where we're all going to end up because we're working for these patrons loyally and with full knowledge that we are doing development. In other words, moving people around and putting up buildings where other people will have to move out, perfectly sincerely. And yet, isn't the city got a right to keep its neighborhoods exactly the way they want them?
Once again, I still think you propose too much of a black and white situation. I think there's also a sort of third force there, which is a mediating force that, in fact, in a lot of cases has, in fact, resulted in development, but development that is smaller and more responsible than that which has otherwise been proposed or might have happened in a laissez-faire situation. I mean, the difference is not between, the choice is not between laissez-faire on the one hand and virtual, laissez-faire on the one hand and Williamsburg on the other. We might say sort of Houston or Williamsburg. I mean, there's a long way in between. I mean, if San Francisco is trying to become too much like Williamsburg, that does not mean that the only alternative is Houston, is just letting anything at all happen, I would think. I mean, there's such a thing as limited, regulated growth that permits development, permits change, but does not permit it at the gargantuan scale that we've been seeing it. What about Times Square, since we've started on that? You've just offered a very articulate and persuasive case against your project. What's the argument for it?
The argument for it is the rejuvenation of that part of town. I don't know anything about the arguments. I just hear what I read in the papers. And it's it's a very difficult problem. There's no rights and wrongs. There's no answer. And I work for one person in that great agglomeration, which is going to happen anyhow.
Let me ask you, speaking not only about Times Square, but about something you touched on a moment or two ago. You portray the architect, it seems to me, as rather weaker, almost more of a pawn in this great process than I would suspect he necessarily has to be, particularly an architect of your stature. I mean, are you really saying that an architect, even as eminent as you, is hired by developers only to decorate a particular mass that they have determined must be so?
It's not they, it's Alex Cooper that determined the mass, don't forget.
Well, at 42nd Street, yes, but let's just talk in more general ways.
Jerry Hines determined the square footage of the oval building, the elliptical building, and we built it. Simple as that. I don't know what we're supposed to do. Are we supposed to take a hard line and tell our clients that they can't build as big a building as they're allowed?
Not can't, but what about...
Should?
Should, or what about just programmatic questions in general? Certainly the architect's role is not to determine the program, but is it not to advise, to react on it, to comment on it, to say, maybe this might not be...
Just a thing to do for the city of New York? I think I'll hire Paul now to go and speak to my clients about how naughty it is to build too big buildings. It's a very hard thing, because if they bought land at a certain price and want to get terribly rich by having rents go as high as the market will bear, then I don't see that any lecturing on anybody's part is going to affect that, and certainly not by the architect. We are the kept people of these patrons.
But there are obviously cases in which architects, in your view, should not accept certain jobs.
Certainly not. That's our private concern, not to accept it, and we don't.
Right, okay.
I refused the Grand Central Station, after all.
Right,
and
you refused
the other
St.
day
Bart's.
a London station, and I refused. No, I wasn't offered St. Bart's. That's not fair.
Okay.
Oh, no. I would have.
You would have refused.
Oh, naturally.
Okay, fine. Okay, so...
Somebody might say, Johnson, that's Monday morning quarterbacking. Anybody can say that.
I think...
It's too easy. But I did refuse in London just the other day to cover up one of the stations, and I refused to do the Grand Central. But not very many I don't, and I don't when they're as good a client as either George Klein or Gerald Hines. And I think that that's a very difficult thing to put onto the architect, a load to put on him, that we build socially irresponsible buildings. We build what the temper of the country and the temper of our patrons tell us to build. I don't see there's any other possible choice.
Well, I think that's all the more reason that in my sense at least, if major blame should be laying anywhere, it's really at the feet of the city itself.
Certainly. That's why when I'm attacked in Boston, as I am virulently for soiling their fond city, why don't they change the rules if they don't want the buildings?
Sure.
I don't blame them. If Boston doesn't want any buildings built, why don't they tell us? But in the meantime, we're deep into it, digging away, and then we're told we can't build it. That's unfair.
Well, Boston has a particularly irrational system, it seems to be. It's sort of you build what the authority decides when you're sort of in the middle of designing it is okay.
Sure, if they happen to want it at the time.
Right, and if they change their mind, you change your building.
All I meant was, by my dichotomy, that may have been overblown because the only way you can understand it. But it certainly is that this is changing rapidly. I mean, when I was young, starting in architecture, it was more Houstonian, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And now it's much more San Franciscan.
Right.
Although it hasn't reached San Francisco's extent yet. London is infinitely worse than any of them all put together, except at Mrs. Thatcher.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes to the other leg of the dichotomy very quickly when you elect Mrs. Thatcher. See? It's mixed up slightly in England with left and right. Well, I don't know what those mean, but apparently it means a lot over there. And Mrs. Thatcher is conservative, right?
Right,
yeah.
right.
Although
Correct.
she's not a conservationist, she's the opposite, you see. So it's all very...
Oh, but we have, but that dichotomy, that strange sort of anomaly exists here too. I mean, I think, after all, I might say that conservatives are generally more interested in conserving money than in conserving values, and therefore,
you want to be quoted, Paul? Yeah.
They are very rarely interested in conserving buildings because conserving buildings is not always the most instantly profitable alternative.
And Mrs. Thatcher got hold of the planning department of the City of London. The City of London means, the Wall Street of London. decided that they were being conservationist. We call it preservationist, and so they wouldn't let them build full height. But so the City of London, the Wall Street, as it were, decided to move out of Wall Street, because to hell with the city if they weren't going to let them build. All of a sudden, Mrs. Thatcher was there with her axe, you see, and chopped off the head of the planning board. So all of a sudden, London is becoming the Houston of the future. Maybe if we wait long enough, we get Mrs. Thatcher over here to take a whack at the local boards.
I thought, I might say in the person of our mayor, I'm not sure that we're that far away, but in any case. What do you see happening in New York, in fact, in the next few years?
Nothing, just a total, absolute mess. Well, it's perfectly all right. There are messier towns in the world, and we're sort of halfway in between the messiness of, let's say, Istanbul, and the cleanliness of, I don't want to pick a clean town, do I?
Do, find one.
Find one, yeah. Well, the small towns of the world. But I don't know, the future in New York, I wouldn't dare to prognosticate. Would you, Paul?
The future of New York?
And on this question that we're discussing.
I think, in fact, there's going to be some slowing down of development. I think, first, the market is doing it anyway, at least in the short term. So that there's going to be a lot less happening in the next 5 or 10 years, which I hope will give us the breathing space to plan more intelligently and think through some things a little more intelligently than we've done in the sort of orgy of the last generation.
Yeah, planning never has been able to do anything, has it?
Not much in this city, no.
No.
The only really sensible planning that was ever done in New York was laying out the grid in 1811, and then they sort of gave up at that point.
There wasn't nothing there. That was the easiest way to do it. There wasn't any virtue there. Laid out the plots for the speculators to come and speculate on. Right. Yeah. But the absence of planning is what you see, not the planning. You do
except the zoning laws have had tremendous impact in New York.
On architecture, but not on what they thought they were doing, which is cutting the amount of overbuilding.
No, that's true. Absolutely.
No, we've got several impasses. For instance, what are we going to do with the landmarks? What are we going to do with the churches? See, you cannot force a church to go on leaking. You got to let them tear it down and try to make money like everybody else, or do you? Maybe you don't. Now, there's no question about Reverend Bowers. He's perfectly able to keep that church up. But all the thousands of churches, there's no landmark person that can answer that.
Well, I think the only truly equitable thing is for society, if it is asking that churches make a certain sacrifice for the good of society, also be willing to share the burden of that.
Yeah, but the city
on the other hand, but to some extent, society does already by virtue of tax exemption.
Yes, you see, they all say, "Oh, what have we been doing for you for the past couple hundred years?"
I mean, I think the whole thing about St. Bart's and those other things is, if they want to develop this as profit-making real estate, I think they should be free to do so long as they pay the city back real estate taxes with compounded interest for the entire length of the time they've held that property. Then let them turn it into profit-making real estate and play by the same rules everybody else plays by.
Very good.
But they're really asking in a way to run with the hare and run with the hounds by saying that we are a church, we are special, we are tax exempt, but we can also play just like Jerry Hines and Rudin and George Klein and so forth. So.
It's awfully hard for the individual architect. I don't know there is an architect that doesn't believe in city planning. There's no architect that doesn't dream of not building the single building. I mean, I don't know anybody that when faced with a part of town that isn't developed wouldn't like to have that part in his hands at totality. Transportation, the width of the streets. Where's the street gone as an object of design? In the old days, the street was what was beautiful. You take 11th Street today, is it 11th, 12th, something like that? That is so beautiful in one block. But that is, the street becomes the building then. And all of us, I only had one chance, I'm beginning, I hope, on the Potomac, to be able to design the street before the buildings. How wide is the street? 2 trees? 2 rows of 2 trees? How high are those buildings supposed to go? Is Mumford right that you can't have children in an elevator, and that everybody has the right in this world to look out into a tree? In other words, once you get up to 20th floor, it's not good for children. Everybody knows that. So everybody wants to dream. I do. of a town or an environment that is more to our heart's desire. And then, of course, leads us to preservation and how. I mean, I would just cut down the level of building in New York to 6 stories. What's wrong with that? It was 6 stories once before. Of course, a lot of people would lose a lot of money, but a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money anyhow. It's just sooner rather than later. I mean, this is one side of me, my preservationist necktie. On the other, I absolutely love Houston, Texas. It's my passion. Why not? I've never met a city official in Houston. I built the whole city almost. I just say, yeah, that's a nice piece of land. And what do we put on that? Well, let's see, the market kind of slow. I guess we'll go to 60 stories and stop. You know, it's just absolutely delightful, but it doesn't have much to do with that quality of life that we dream about on the other 16 hours a day. You see, it's not, it'll never get, that attitude will never get us on to the next step in architecture, which has to be the totality of the city in some way. See? So, I don't care whether you call it socialism or not, we've got to have some sort of general viewpoint on what the futures of our city are going to do. Or we just strangle in our own automobile fumes. I mean, it's just unnecessary, and I don't know why. Whose responsibility is this? I don't know. I mean, it's certainly not the architects. Naturally, what can we do except vote, and vote against our own pocketbooks, maybe. But in the meantime, our patrons are single-building patrons. I've done, I think, a couple of nice buildings in Houston where you can still see them. But in New York, it's impossible to get buildings you can see because you're all too close to the streets. And so I'm enjoying life as a beneficiary of the leftover developer mentality of when everything was free in the 20s, or in Houston still today. Houston had other troubles. But I don't know which of these branches is going to predominate. It's clearly that when LaGuardia was here, I remember, we didn't have community boards that came in later. The community boards have at once focused attention on the requirements of the users of the architecture. And indeed, why shouldn't the users of the architecture have a lot to say? It's the resulting mess that's the problem. It's neither good, clean, old-fashioned capitalism, whatever it used to be called, and a public responsibility by the public officials of what does make a beautiful city. The people that want beautiful cities have no money. Okay? And the people with money want more money. That's all. They're not interested in giving it half of it back to the public. They say their taxes are too high anyhow. I don't know where they are, but I know that some developers get very, very rich. Well, then maybe it would have been better if they hadn't gotten so rich. You can argue all the way up and down the spectrum of freedom of individuality, freedom to do what you want on your own land, freedom not to be taxed for, let's say I paid $20 million and the city comes along and say, I'm sorry, that plot from now on worth only $1 million because you can only build 6 stories on it. That's not fair. I mean, if you pay $20 million, you have a so-called right to make $21 million or $20 million, 0.5. But the whole thing is so messed up now, and I don't, you know, it's my own indecision and my own talking, can't you? That I'm on all sides of all these problems as an architect. We are simply caught in the middle. A big developer called me and said, Philip, it's all over. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, you no longer can build in New York City because of the screaming and yelling that goes on every time you have a design. And he said, architects from now on can only build in the suburbs. Well, all right, build in the suburbs then. Let them build in the suburbs. Let them eat cake. But somehow or other, we've got to go on living in the city. And with the mayor, of course, before he was mayor, was very much on the other side. The mayor was not a developer's man. In fact, we had terrible battles on a stage that looked just like this once when I was building the library of New York University. And he represented the people of the neighborhood who said, we don't want any building on that site. It'll make a shadow on the square. We did build it, and it did make a shadow on the square. I suppose I never could find it. It doesn't seem to hurt the square very much. It's a low building, very respectful to its neighbors. And it was all right. But he was screaming and yelling about the horrors of all these rich people taking over the land of these lovely little people that feed the pigeons. And that he was their representative. He was going to stop it. Well, he wouldn't talk that way now, you see. In other words, somehow when you get elected to office, you're apt to change your mind.
You might be distressed that it was so small now, actually.
Yes.
I think you sort of wonder why it couldn't be bigger.
But he's on both sides of everything, too. There is a very good man. I think he's been a marvelous mayor. I'd vote for him again. But you get caught in the system, don't you? Haven't we all been? One way or another. We get our finger in, then the arm, then the whole thing, and then you're off, you see. In the meantime, let's look at the nice side. This is the most exciting city in the world. Would it be if we'd planned it all carefully? I wonder. You see, the robber barons of the 18th century built the English squares, which we now like, you see. We built, in our ignorance or in our pride, a group of very, very tall buildings that are very, very close together with no way to get there and no way to get from one to the other. It sounds kind of silly, but it's marvelously exciting, isn't it? Would you really want to live anywhere else? People all say they're so glad to get out of New York. That's because they don't live here in the first place. But those of us that do are extremely happy. I don't think happiness is something nobody is, but it's very exciting, and we are not about to change it. So maybe all sides of Mr. Koch are the same, and maybe there is this spectrum of our desires of every one of us to accept and to excite and to go on exciting, and we don't want to lose in our endeavors to calm everything down. We don't want to lose the excitement of this buccaneering, marvelous, thrilling kind of building and expansion that the country was founded on.
Do you feel there's more or less sort of that raw, rough energy to the city today than there was a generation or two ago?
There's more or less?
Yeah, of that kind of energy in New York today.
I don't know. What do you think? I was there and you weren't.
I wasn't there 50 years ago. So, I mean, today we tend to romanticize the 20s and 30s enormously. I mean, these were sort of the ideal decades that, at least aesthetically, a lot of architects today aspire to. And they're thought of as the golden age of New York, the years between the wars.
Phooey.
How would you, okay, good, why? How would you compare the sense of the city today with the sense you had of it then?
I was very prejudiced at that time. There was only one kind of architecture, that's what we called modern, and we knew we were right and everybody else was wrong, and we tried to force it on the entire aesthetic establishment. We did rather too good a job, I guess, because modern architecture and the glass box certainly took over the nation. And but then I was only interested in aesthetics, and I didn't have a feel of the nature of the city. But don't forget, I went through the Depression, which is a harrowing business. So I left architecture and art in every way and went off to the boondocks, but didn't do any good either.
But you weren't practicing as an architect then. You were
no, I wasn't.
Just a writer and a critic. And
that's right.
Curator.
Yeah, a very peculiar thing. But now let's see. You were saying, was it? Did he say something funny or did I? But I was trying to think, why is the 20s and 30s a good time? Wasn't.
Okay.
No, it's much more exciting now. Because architecture's better. Architecture they're more. You people wouldn't be here 50 years ago. There weren't anybody coming to this place or any other place to listen to two old codger, one young codger, chatting about art of architecture. That was unheard of. In which case, maybe we should talk about the art of architecture. These people are theoretically interested in architecture as well as
yes, they are.
My worries about the patronage system.
Okay. Tell me how the patronage system affects the art of architecture.
We did that. That's my point. The patronage system works very well, thank you.
Does it, though? I mean, do you really feel that the work you've done in the last few years represents architecture on as serious a theoretical plane as it could under, say, other circumstances?
No, I think Pope Julius would have done better.
Okay.
But he wasn't the great democracy that we are.
Right.
So that sort of argues that you'd be better under Stalin than you would under Roosevelt?
I don't think that really is the question. I think the question
I don't think that's very logical, do you? No, I don't think I made that logical.
No. Let me ask it a different way. Let's talk more specifically about style. And obviously it's been said too many times to bear extended repeating right now. You've obviously been a leader in the movement back toward historical recall, historical illusion, historicism, whatever we want to call it. What is the difference between your use of history today and the way it was used by architects in the 20s, by architects in the late 19th century, by architects in the early 19th century, when, particularly in terms of Gothic, it seemed to have immense moral force behind it. It was as fervent as modernism in its way, as moralistic. Now it seems we look at history not in terms of anything that possesses any sense of moral rightness, as both modernism and the Gothic revival did, but more like a sort of vast smorgasbord of things to pick and choose whatever seems to taste good. There does not seem to be any deep ideological commitment to anything, which is what allows you to create, say, a Flemish Renaissance skyscraper in Houston with a Romanesque base. A building that I must say is actually visually one of my favorites, the Republic Bank.
That's that bank, you remember.
Right, but a building that obviously is best justified on what we might call compositional grounds, as a handsomely massed composition with meaningful space inside it, not as a serious essay in the meaning of historical elements and the symbolism of history and so forth.
Yeah, now this is the most difficult question I guess you could have asked and the most important today, because we are at sort of a impasse in the use of history. Since we started being against the modern, we architects have taken about 6 different roads at the same time. In other words, it doesn't make a very consistent story, does it? There's some of us that take it very seriously. I believe the smorgasbord theory. I hate to call it that. I like to call it to join the great stream of history of architecture that's always used past things. And you say you take what you choose. You don't. You take what's appropriate to the either the place or the needs, you see.
Well, let's talk about that building in Houston.
That's a bad one to pick.
It's a very good one to pick, I think. I mean, it happens to be a wonderful object to look at. It's one of the most beautifully composed things that you've done in the last 20 years of your work. On the other hand, it doesn't mean a damn thing, it seems to me, in terms of what it says about banking, about Houston, about Texas, about offices, about all of those things. Maybe it doesn't have to. You could say, no, it doesn't, and does it matter? Not at all. Would be a perfectly reasonable response if you were to say that. But what do you say?
That.
Okay.
I think he has me, children, don't you? I think it's right to push that to that conclusion, certainly, although I make lots of talk in other places.
No, I know you do. Okay.
As in Chicago, using root to hide behind, which is pretty damn silly. It doesn't look at all like root.
No, in fact, it's root, that building in Chicago, which again is one of the, I think, more handsome of your recent things, is sort of root filtered through AT&T with a little bit of New York flamboyance to it. It's not... I actually have a new theory, which is that all the pink granite buildings work. Because, I mean, AT&T, Republic Bank, and the new building in Chicago are all of essentially the same material, right? With some variation.
But as I pointed out to you on the phone the other day, the buildings that you do not prefer among our buildings is also a pink granite building.
Which one is that?
The elliptical building.
Oh, the elliptical building. It's
same granite.
Yeah, it's pink granite and brown granite and metal and glass and
you said there were too many
orange granite. And
in your review, you said there were too many granites. It's only one.
Well, there's too many somethings. I mean, there's a lot. That facade is full of stripes and stripes and stripes.
It's because it's a striped building, not because it's not. So the pink granite theory doesn't stick because you also like Transco.
Very much.
Yeah, so you see, some of our glass buildings work.
I think Transco works quite beautifully.
We don't talk about the ones that don't work. I think we're safer grounds there, only to talk about the buildings that we can both
What about let's talk about Boston, in fact, for a minute. Which
Boston is pink granite, but that's good.
Well, it's pink granite, and there I noticed you use that's the complex in downtown Boston that's now nearing completion. That has
pink granite.
Several different towers. All right, I retract the pink granite theory.
All right, we'll go. If he can push me, I can push him. All right, even. We drop the pink granite.
We drop the pink granite. That's the building that is designed to look like a cluster of towers of different heights.
That's right.
With several different skins and
That's right.
Palladian windows all over the place. And,
all over the place.
And pink granite all over. Why is so much going on in that building?
Because I felt that the building was crowded. I felt that a mass that would express that proper mass that had to go on that site might look overwhelming. So by jamming buildings of a different looks, it looked more as if we built 4 or 5 buildings than one building.
But it doesn't really, because in fact, you often have corners where one skin treatment bumps into the other. Up another. So
well, instead of being like that in regular Boston, it goes like that. I think it's a little different. That's all. It doesn't. There's no reason.
Okay. No reason. Did I hear?
That's right.
Okay.
It wasn't very historical. The only historical thing up there are the Palladian windows, which I found out where I got them.
Where?
I didn't, but I mean, if one wants to start looking, Ledoux. He did an rather unknown palace.
For Boston? No.
Covered with, Ledoux. We dropped that. You won that one about my historical references having nothing to do with anything.
Okay.
These Palladian windows don't have anything to do with anything except me and Ledoux.
Okay.
But it is an odd source, isn't it? And I think it does break up the facade.
Ledoux also was your source in Houston for the architecture school, right?
In
At
a
the
much more
University
literal way,
University of Houston.
Yeah.
Right. What has that been like? That's actually one I have yet to visit. So
that's my best building, but isn't recognized as such by Mr. Papadimitriou and other great critics that belong to the other university. It depends on which university you belong to down there.
I see.
What you think of that building. But it's amusing to see the architectural elite of Houston chopped right to in the middle by depending on which university they belong to, not which best building. I'd rather have you go down. I trust your judgment sometimes. Anyhow, where were we?
Okay.
Why did I do that in Boston? Jam all these things squeezed up together. That's a good question, but there's no answer. See, I know what I thought I was doing was reducing the mammothicity, the overwhelming thing that a fortress of windows would have made along there by breaking them down into different buildings. If I crushed them together and left the mark, as it were, on the rest of the building, what I did was to jam the buildings together and leave the mark of their jamming together on the taller building, like a gouge. So there's a gouge in the taller buildings where the lower buildings ran into them. That seemed a delightful idea. See? Whether it was or not, I haven't seen the building yet, so I can't say.
Do you visit your buildings as a rule?
I do, but not recently because I haven't been able to travel.
Right.
But I can again now, so I intend to go up next week.
Good.
But it is an odd building, isn't it?
I mean, it seems to me that one could experiment with that kind of massing and yet still have
more respect one part for the other part.
Okay, fine.
Well, I thought for once it might be good also to have them pretend they crashed into each other. But this was a couple of years ago. I might be more rigorous in my historical illusions, which doesn't exist in that building.
Okay.
I mean, I can't hide behind any historicity that I can think of for crushing the buildings together.
What about the other Boston building, the one that
the
one in
building?
Boylston Street that was sort of referred to by somebody as the mighty Wurlitzer?
Somebody. There is only one somebody.
No, I've never said that.
We don't talk to critics a good deal of the time anyhow, except Paul. We always talk to Paul. But critics otherwise drive us up the wall. That's a building that has a Wurlitzer feature in the middle, I guess. I don't know where they got it. Wurlitzer's never had features like that in my day. But it doesn't make any difference. It's a very, very correct, in quotation marks, 17th century pattern of windows and pilasters. And maybe too rigid. That's another point. But it's also a piazza navona stuck in front of a tall slab that was the square footage that the client insisted on putting there. So I wasn't worried about it until Boston decided it didn't want the building there. But they decided too late, so it's going up. It's very sad.
Half of it's going up,
next
right?
Question. Well, there were two parts, two buildings.
Right, and one of them is going up and the other's not?
The other one isn't.
And what's happening to the other half?
I don't know. They don't talk to us. City of Boston doesn't talk to me.
Very strange story.
Very strange town.
Speaking of strange towns, what's happening in Washington with your skyscraper proposal for Maryland?
Oh, that, well, there again, the Republicans rather like the idea of leaving states' rights and leaving the county to do what they want.
Right.
See, it's the New Dealers that are left around that don't want it. And
Right.
although I am a violently New Deal Democrat, I nevertheless and now think the Republicans are just wonderful. So, see, it depends on whose ox gets gored, I believe it's called.
Well, is the tell us a little more about the ox and whether it will be gored in your...
I don't know how it's going to come out.
Do you think there's a future for that project if the big tower is not built? The lower sections?
Oh, the lower
section.
section.
The Leon Creer section?
The Leon Creer part, I hope, Leon Creer means, ladies and gentlemen, this famous architect of Luxembourg that now practices in London. Are we all familiar with his work? Maybe not. But he's the leading one, the really strict classicism that especially believes was it, that it's the street that's important. And with me, of course, I think Creer may be the most interesting architect now not practicing because he's too young and too... he doesn't like to practice. He likes the theory of architecture, which is very, very important. But he's the leader, and you just watch for him, because he's the leader of this direction, which is an eminently sensible one. And he does beautiful work and drawings beautifully in that direction. Again, in this book of Watkins, he's the end chapter that is for the future. See? So you watch for him. What were we talking about? Oh, my little town.
Right, your little town.
I don't know whether it'll get built or not, but there's no reason why not. It's the row house, as the English call it, the terrace house, is a well-known way of building. What are we doing wrong, Paul?
Nothing.
Looking
I'm
out
just
of the
looking
wings,
at you,
thinking
no.
we've done something wrong.
No, I'm just listening.
The microphones are working and all that. Though this village should be the first place in America of a Fiat town, that is a town done at once, with that feeling that the street is the most important thing, and the housing is all walk-up height. No, I think we have some 5-story things, but low. And the use of the waterfront is the beginning of it. It's the curve. So we have lights all along the curve, like the famous promenade in Bombay, all you people that travel the world. There's a wonderful Queen's necklace that goes around the lights of the Bombay waterfront, which we're copying. And it's going to be the most charming place to live if it ever gets built. But sometimes things are apt not to get built.
I can't imagine why.
Money, money, money. Now, where were we? Oh,
Washington.
yeah, we did Washington. I think we ought to follow up where are the next generation people going. We did describe the Creer direction, which is all totally classical, Renaissance, rigid Renaissance layout of streets and squares, left over mostly in our conscience by Boston, Louisburg Square. You know, where
See, with Creer, I mean, there is historicism with powerful moral and ideological content behind it.
Ideological content. He's very ideological, and you should do away with steel, and you should do away with the Industrial Revolution.
Right. I mean, there's rather more ideology than...
more than you can use or swallow conveniently. But it's a very strong direction and will be watched and followed. We all acknowledge Creer as sort of a leader in that direction. Then you get a more cut of that, a slice up more to reality in Sterling. He's a kid in my mind, although he's, 55 now?
Who?
Sterling.
Sterling, yeah, right.
Yeah. Then at the far end, you get Frank Gehry that we mentioned before, that is the most idiosyncratic architect in the country. We more or less had to write him off for a few years because he only did things by waving chain link fencing around, and that didn't really seem to make much sense out of building. That marina is really terrible, you know, that he did down in Newport Beach or Laguna or somewhere.
The what?
The marina that he built out of chain link fencing. Mm-hmm. But Watch for him. He's going to be maybe...
He's doing an addition to a house of yours in Wayzata, Minnesota.
Wonderful.
Have you seen it? Have you looked at it?
No, I must go.
Have you seen the design?
Indeed. Oh, I think it's the best thing he's done. He believes in getting little houses, a house, very small, and making 3 houses out of it around a little square. Small, with every once in a while a great big dome that he takes from one of my buildings, an homage to Johnson, a little cupola. And in other words, it's very delicate and very fanciful, humorous, idiosyncratic, and delicious. Now, if this man really, this is what he can do. Let's see if he does do it. If this house comes off, it's almost finished, and it's juxtaposed with one of my Miesian objects of the 50s. So these two sit here and talking to each other in Minnesota, if you ever, next time you get up there. Freeze to death.
I was there a few weeks ago, actually. It's quite remarkable.
Oh, yeah? You went to see the show?
I went to see the show, and I went to see the house as well, yeah.
Oh, tell us about it.
The house is not finished yet, but it's going to be, I think it's going to be quite exciting, actually. It's very powerful objects together that together make...
They don't crush each other, though.
No, they don't crush each other at all. They really read as adjacencies more than collision. But I liked your house very much. I mean, it's that period of your early Miesian houses from the early 50s that now is so quaint and old-fashioned.
Isn't it nice?
I mean, you could almost put gingham curtains in the window. It all looks so... That kind of Miesian architecture has now taken on a whole different meaning. But now I wonder, let's explore that for a minute, because I wonder if that's entirely good or not. I mean, that it has become... I mean, here's an architecture that had, in its early years, and even unto the time in the 50s when you were practicing in that mode, had a very powerful sense of moral force behind it. This was the right way. This was the utopian architecture that changed the world.
Yes.
Now, so much has happened that it really does appear quaint and almost cute and lovable. What does all that mean? Yes, all right, exactly. You want to sort of pat this nice little house. Now, some of it is scale, because of course they're all kind of little, and anything little is cute. Yeah. But more of it, I think, is just the passage of time, and that this kind of modernism does not appear to have been able to keep that degree of moral force. Now, maybe it has in some cases. I think it does in Mies. It does in your own glass house, I think. But it doesn't in some of these less major houses. Why is that?
Well, of course, I'm too close to the woods to see the trees. I don't see that, of course. They don't look quaint to me. That's where I came in. I hate the morality end of it, the moral purpose thing. Well, for instance, we look at Victorian Gothic now very objectively with great pleasure. But we forget, we don't even, unless we read Ruskin, we forget that there was any moral fervor. Because they look, that Butterfield Church is too quaint. Oh, that's right, quaint, you see. So in that sense, if Butterfield was quaint, maybe I am. Isn't that a marvelous thought? Well, I should think quite the opposite, that if I went there, I'd think that Gary was quaint. Wouldn't I?
I don't know.
And small and cute. And you didn't think Gary was... He's reading. I can't talk to him.
No, I'm listening. I can do two things at once. It's all right.
Oh, good. But wouldn't you think that I would think that his little house next to mine was quaint?
And indeed you might.
Yeah. Right. So you see, I think it depends on the age of approach to these things.
I mean, I think right now it has a degree of power to it that's...
The Gary thing.
The Gary thing. That's quite impressive.
Here's a prognostication. Maybe he'll get quaint sooner than I got quaint. Mine was a box with open glass things that doesn't look like my glass house, but it looks like the house across the street from my glass house, built the same year. If you've ever been out in New Canaan, right across from my house is one house I did for clients, but it looks just the same as the house in Wayzata. You see if it's quaint, will you? Let me know.
Okay. It's gray brick, not
but don't
red
try
brick.
It's gray brick instead of red brick. While you're there, don't try to get into my place, please.
Okay, yes, actually, there's a questioner who asks if you give guided tours of the glass house.
The glass house, just to stop all that argument, has been already given to the National Trust of Historic Preservation. And so I am shed of it, and it will be open, but not if I have anything to say about it. So I will shoot you if you try to come in. How's that? And then, of course, I'll be arrested for murder. So I don't know. That doesn't work either.
Doesn't work either, exactly. Okay. Are you still building on the Glass House property, by the way?
I am building the cutest little house on that property.
Uh-huh.
Quaint.
Right.
Shingle style.
Little Cape Cod shingle house?
Well, like that shingle house that I worked on the West Coast for a while, you remember?
That was
Personal
Cox Head
one.
Revisited?
Cox Head Revisited. This is just plain Cox Head. And it's a charming little entrance pavilion for use by the National Trust. Now, that's where you'll pay your money when you come on to see my house. I'm going to charge a great deal. They tell me. Yeah.
I'll start saving.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Let's turn to some of your questions.
Yeah, love to.
I'll begin with one of the most incisive and deep. Your architecture has gone postmodern. Why haven't your glasses?
I was afraid you wouldn't know me walking down the street. No, that's a good point, though. There's certain things that go on in there. This is pure my invention before I saw others.
I thought Le Corbusier.
We did think of Corbusier, but we didn't in this sense that I had forgotten I mean, of course I hadn't, but I thought I had. And I wasn't working that way. I was working with pure form that like wheels of a car, and the wells, these wells that are of a car, that they're cut off at the top. It drove me crazy. We all made a big thing in the Museum of Modern Art. The way if a wheel was round, so should the well be round. And the glasses were coming out of a round eye, so they should be round. Well, I don't know why they should be. But that was our conviction as members of the International Style Morality team, that glasses had to be round. And so the trouble of making these, it took me about a year working with these different companies that didn't know what the hell I was talking about. Round glasses, they won't work. They had the nerve to tell me that the round glass wouldn't work because the glass in there would turn around and twist, and then I couldn't see out anymore. They haven't moved in 50 years. I'm very pleased, though, because now if you go to buy a pair like this, it says in very fine print in gold in there, Philip. Now, that's what I call fame and delight, don't you? Well, let's get back.
No good. While we're on the subject of small-scale objects, Mr. Johnson, would you comment on how you, as a leading architect, have been able to escape doing dishes for Swid Powell? And... or what do you think of your colleagues' products?
Oh, I think it's fine to work for Swid Powell. I refused because I was too busy. And I knew I wouldn't be any good at it, and I didn't see any point in doing it anyhow, and besides, they're not very good.
They're not very good.
Well,
the other things.
Look, the plates, the Swid Powell, no, let's not get bogged down with that. They're doing a wonderful job, and I didn't have time.
Okay. Did you select the furniture in the AT&T arcade?
No.
No. Okay.
The crosses we bear.
Okay. Indeed. Okay.
Had something to do with it, though, not to my credit.
What do you think of Donald Trump as a developer?
Oh.
Would you accept the Television City Commission if it were offered to you?
That's a hypothetical question, therefore I can't answer it. The second part of the question was the first part there, was what is he as a developer? He's absolutely charming. The most charming, delightful man I've met in years.
And you did do a project for him that never happened.
That didn't work, but doesn't make any difference. He and I just he's a great client. You can go in and he starts talking before you walk in the room, and before you get 4 sentences out, you're out the other side. But you've made your points, and he's made his, and you go right on. A delightful man to work for. Next.
Okay.
That's the point. Would I do that? Well, why not?
Okay. Is there a reason you don't have a building in Columbus, Indiana?
Oh, I did the stupid thing architects can do. I refused it. 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, Arrow Saarinen, who was the friend of Mr. What's the name?
Miller,
asked me, and I said I was too busy. So they wouldn't ask me again.
How and to what extent do you control the designs attributed to you?
Somebody read Le Monde, I guess. There's an article in Le Monde saying I never did any of my own work.
Really? Oh.
It's perfectly marvelous because I'm the only designer in the office. Except Burgee. I mean, we work together, but there isn't any other designing going on. Never has.
Well, the basic concept is yours. Is that right?
Oh, yes. So
Yeah,
any
right,
of the designs
right.
are all my
And
fault.
others carry through the drawings and the
The
details.
way I do it
Okay.
is all in the New Yorker next week advertisement. But I work on the weekends.
Right.
I bring in sketches, bad ones, very bad. It's not the point.
Right.
Then I work out the hardlining of it in the office and take it back and throw it away or redo it.
Okay.
That's just a method of designing. It isn't other people doing the designing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, of course, Sorkin. That's right.
Okay. Aside from yourself and John Burgee, who in the architectural community today is creating the most intellectually stimulating and aesthetically pleasing commercial buildings and skyscrapers?
Commercial. Here I am. I think I'm interested in other people's work, and the least I can do is to name who.
Well, it's interesting because actually, when you talk about other people's work, I notice you generally jump down a generation or two and deal with architects who are not your competitors in the commercial arena, but in fact tend to work more in the institutional and residential world. So,
You're right. I do. Oh,
Okay.
Kevin Roach.
okay,
But then you see, then he built this building on 53rd,
right,
which doesn't.
do
You
it.
know, the one across from the Museum of Modern Art? Doesn't thrill me, but I think he's a terribly good architect. I think the building down at Wall Street is terribly good. He has 60 Wall Street.
Right, right.
All right, let's put down Kevin Roach. He certainly is
Okay, we don't need to.
I admire
okay,
very much.
Fine, fine. Okay. When Frank Lloyd Wright was asked, "What do you think of Philip Johnson's architecture?" he replied, "I don't think about Philip Johnson's architecture." What do you think of Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture?
I do think of Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture. I've learned several oceans worth from him, but not from the things one would think. I've learned most from his San Francisco Terrace. Are you familiar with those row houses? Well, they're gabled, of course, interest me. And they're a complete mastery of the gable styles of this world, Frank Lloyd Wright had in Chicago in 1893. The other passion I have is the Hillside Home School, 1899. His knowledge was fully developed way early, long before the prairie houses. The idea of the shelter and the sheltered. And the fascination with detail in the corners. Corners are the most important things you can do. And he knew all about corners. He somehow got it in his blood. He was perhaps our only genius in our profession in this country. Richardson, whom I used to admire more, was sort of a one-note man compared to Wright. Wright knew everything about everything right away. International style, sure. And he did the Kaufman House, see? Oh, you mean you want to use structure, do you? So we'll load a column up and build a whole building based on a lily pad column. Would never occur to any other architect in the world, no matter how much they admired structure, to really use structure in that way that he did. I mean, it's just incomparably great. Concrete? Sure. Unity Temple. I mean, it's breathtaking what that man could do with a flick of the wrist. It relieves us all in the shade. And if I could just, as people say about, I'd rather write this poem than take Quebec tonight, you know, people like that. Well, I'd rather do one building by Wright than finishing anything I've got.
While we're on the subject of Wright, what do you think about the Guggenheim situation?
I can't talk about that because Guathame is a good friend of mine. Go on to the next question.
All right, what do you think about the Whitney situation?
That's easier. I like his graves very much.
Have you seen the revised scheme?
That wasn't a very good set of answers, was it?
No, it was not at all.
Boy, did he knock me out that time.
One need not read very much between very many lines there.
It's very easy.
Have you seen the revised Whitney scheme yet?
No.
It's better.
How is it?
It's better.
Oh, I think the first was good. Well,
This is better, I think. Other than not accepting a project, how else have you protested against a project you felt shouldn't be built? Can you be specific? And second, have any of your works been destroyed or altered by another architect? How did this affect you emotionally?
I don't know. Do you think anything of mine has?
Museum of Modern Art, I guess, part of it was, right?
Oh, my garden, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, just
garden, one of the wings.
A couple little tears. No, that's all right.
Okay.
If I'd have had that job that Pele had of doing over the Museum of Modern Art, I'd have hurt more of my own things.
Okay.
I think he did the very best he could. It's an awful job.
What about the...
Oh, what I mean is, it's always awful to tack onto a building. Poor Graves, what a first job to give him in town, for God's sake.
What about the first part of that question?
What was it?
How can one protest against a project that shouldn't be built? Is there a way besides turning down the work?
Oh, being my personal protest
Right.
against an ugly building? I can't. Professional ethics.
Okay.
All architecture, my friends, aren't you? No?
Okay. Do you believe the architect should take into consideration context and the design of the surrounding areas when designing a structure? And if so, how do you account for the proliferation of buildings, some by you, which seem to bear no relationship to what is around them?
I love context, except when it gets in my way. I think every architect would agree. The Republic Bank didn't. The only context it did obey was the cacophony of the Houston skyline. There isn't any texture there to worry about. However, if I were building in Miami Beach, South Beach, I would damn well respect the Art Deco of that neighborhood, because theirs is something that exists. If I were to build in London in the West End there, I certainly would keep the skyline and the fenestration and the brickwork, if I could get it, that they have there now. You see, it really depends what are you being contextual for and at. The job I have now in London is one that really brings this question up, because it's the whole South Bank opposite the Tower Bridge. Well, it's a very sensitive area. It has to be big, and it can't go high. What do? You see? So I'm stuck. You see? Which context do I make contextual with? The county building, Parliament buildings, or the Lasden's Great National Theater, you know, the sliding planes? It's very hard. I haven't got the answer yet.
One of your greatest legacies might be your version of John Soane's museum that you will leave in Connecticut. What do you think he, John Soane, might say should he visit your house?
Be horrified.
Why? And what do you think of his fantasy?
Well, I was studying it the other day. It was a great deal better. He had a sense enough when he got to the spring line of the arch to have a collar or a capital, and then to place the lid, the cross vault. This was not the cross vault. That's another room. But the breakfast room is a handkerchief dome that you place it down on there, leaving those funny little shapes around, going from post to post. We can't get technical, but he wouldn't like it.
Okay.
He might like my own apartment, though, which is a cross vault, which comes not from the breakfast room, but from the library of that house. It is a very shallow cross vault, and there I was sensible enough to hold it on columns. I didn't know much about Soane or architecture when I did the domed room in the country place. Don't forget, I was straight from the modern movement.
You were one of the first people to have brought Soane to American attention, though, weren't you?
Well, Russell Hitchcock.
Russell Hitchcock,
Oh, yeah.
mainly?
Russell pointed him out to me, and I got wild with excitement. Dulwich Gallery is still the father of all
Right.
all galleries.
Okay. Is God really in the details?
No, of course not. Mises' God was in the detail.
Okay. What do you think history will remember you the most for?
Dumbarton Oaks.
Wow, really?
Well, it's the one most consistently pleasant of my buildings. That's the museum in Washington, in case you get down there. It doesn't cost much to get in, advertisement. But it's absolutely charming. It suits its purpose admirably. The structural solution is humorous but simple. The materials are exquisite beyond all the extruded bronze and marble floors and slate. I use their slate the way it should be used, on edge. You put slate on edge in a paving, and it's perfectly beautiful. It makes all these little lines, and I use them radially, if you please. So you had to jam other little. Oh, never mind. It's beautiful. The details are really splendid there. And
It's interesting. I mean, given the date of that building and all that's happened since.
Yeah, it's been an extraordinary, but it is nevertheless an historic thing. I got most of the ideas from Istanbul, I think.
Right.
But that doesn't make much difference because it's a modern building. It was done in the 50s, wasn't it?
Right.
The whole building fit into this room.
That's almost the stage.
No,
But I guess you're right. It's all. You explored brilliantly the modern movement in your work and writings. You then reversed your beliefs and became a leader in the current postmodern wanderings, which is editorial.
I know the comment. I'm familiar with that approach.
Okay. Here. At 80, you still retain all your architectural intellectual powers. Why not make a final reversal and bring us back to the inevitable return to your first beliefs? Many recent publications and exhibitions of the work of younger architects show that they are making tentative explorations within the modern movement. You have the intellectual depth to lead them once more. What do you say?
Well, I don't agree. I was here, I wouldn't go on doing what I'm doing, but there is another point there. We can connect this all together with Creer, and we've only talked about the young people, Creer and Gary, but don't forget the whole direction of modern still goes on, and very well too. We were talking about Gwathmey. He's done a lot of work besides an addition to a certain museum. And there is
Meyer?
Richard Meyer, see, who's done the finest museum in Germany, may be Sterling's, but it might be Meyer's. History will tell. Meyer's Museum in Frankfurt. So the modern movement is alive and well. I couldn't kill it with a little AT&T. All we did was to open up a few windows. My much maligned lipstick building is certainly a modern building with a few Art Deco touches that some of our critics don't like. But we like them that live in the building. But it's certainly a modern building. It's not no historical preference that I know of, except maybe to the Art Deco movement, which is nothing I liked anyhow at the time or now. But the modern movement is doing just fine. It depends on what you mean. A lot of Sterling is modern. Look at the plan of Stuttgart. It is brilliant, but it isn't reminiscing at all. Not like me. Sterling's wonderful new addition to the Tate is not much liked by the Brits, but I love it. You walk into a Tudor pointed arch, low, it's fantastic. And in other words, he picks what he wants among history, but it's a very modern building. You couldn't mistake it for a period piece of any other kind. I'm way at the other extreme and much castigated by my peers because I'm a pasticheur. See, I take a box and decorate it. Well, so does Venturi, but he does it in a different way. But everybody does his own thing and does them all differently. It's so funny the way the modern people picked up the arch, like Barnes's top on Equitable. Well, it doesn't fit. Somehow the modern doesn't fit with the arch. So I think it's better to go whole hog. In fact, Paul himself pointed out, and I'm afraid to say he's right, I hate it, but my big arch as the centerpiece of Transco is out of keeping. Maybe. And Transco is perfectly modern. It's a little bit copied from Nebraska, I suppose.
A little bit of Nebraska, a little bit of John Mead Howells, a little bit of
whatever that
thing is
down here,
Panhellenic Tower Hotel.
That's because I could see that out my window, and I was fascinated by the ins and outs of those corners, you know. Right. But that's pretty modern. Glass tower, what?
That's very modern.
Sure. So modern architecture is quite all right, and I don't have to go back and look at that. I can still cheer on. Mies van der Rohe is still one of the great architects. We have nobody like Mies now. We have nobody like Corbusier. Corbusier, the greatest painter, brushstroke man of the times. Mies, the greatest rigid interpreter of structure we've ever seen. And of course, Frank Lloyd Wright, the greatest of 2 centuries we have. But who would you say today? You see? You would have a hard time finding anybody of that acceptance. And there's plenty of us old enough to be named if they being crowned, whatever you get in this crazy world. And none of us are. It doesn't exist today. All right, things change in cycles. We're going through a very fallow, very exciting one, where a Gary or a Gwathmey could easily stand up, you see, and be a form giver of our time. A Rossi could, a Botta could, a Bofill could. Nobody knows yet, but that is still in becoming, isn't it? Bofill's gigantism might not go very far. Botta's playfulness might not work out over the long pull. But Creer's urban designs may indeed and do work as a work of absolute genius. Gary, I think that the count is still out on it, but he's young. He's only 55, child. But there's just possible that thing that you may have seen in the publications of his new Dallas building. I know the developer well, and I'm urging that he build it. It's quite mad, but not too mad. This is a strictly genius-type man. So maybe we're going to have another generation. But that another generation isn't historical, the way I like to play. But I feel that we have that breadth and that privilege today. I see nothing wrong. I see nothing wrong when Carl Friedrich Schinkel, one of the people we all bowed down before, did a little chapel once in classical. Then the next day he did, I think it'd be better in Gothic. So he did them both. And on two opposite pages of his own work. The same church. Everything you can see is the same. But they used Gothic arches in one and trabeated and arcuated in the other. Why not? The world is a free, lovely place. And I'm sure we should all enjoy it as much as we can. And with that, children, I think it is time for us all to go home. Or have you got another question?
I think that's a very nice note on which to end. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.